Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this DSA showcase. My name is Marta Suarez. I am the president of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, and it is my pleasure to share with you this showcase session that is titled 6 Gigahertz Band for Unlicensed Access Ecosystem Updates. So the purpose of this session is to share with all of you some of the updates about the 6 gigahertz band. We have had some very exciting discussions about the situation of the band and all the interests from different parties and all the opportunities, especially that unlicensed access to the band can provide. So if we could please move to the next slide. And the next one, please. So this showcase is organized by the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. We are a global cross-industry non-for-profit organization, and we advocate for efficient use of the spectrum. And in particular, we think that spectrum sharing and licensed access to the spectrum will really increase connectivity for all and will foster innovation. Next slide, please. And today for the agenda, we have prepared, again, as the title says, many updates about the situation of the 6 gigahertz band. We are going to start by my opening remarks and an update about the current situation of the band. Then we will have Jennifer McCarthy, who is the Vice President of Legal Advocacy at Federated Wireless, one of our DSA members. And then we are going to have a presentation from David Wright. He's the head of Global Wireless Policy at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And he's, HPE Aruba is also one of our members of the DSA. And at the end, we are planning to cover some Q&As, and we expect to have questions from you so we can have an interesting discussion. So let's start by the first part of the presentation. Next slide, please. And it's the crucial need that we have in terms of broadband access. So it has been very clear from the public policy perspective, and we have heard from many authorities in the region how important it is to increase access to broadband. And in the region, it's very also important to recognize, according to the Cisco VNI, that Wi-Fi is the primary method to access internet in LATAM. 51.8% of all IP traffic over Wi-Fi it goes over Wi-Fi networks, and that will be the numbers for next year. So when we see this graph, we see that there is a constant growth in internet traffic in LATAM, and we can see that the role of Wi-Fi is extremely important in the region. Wi-Fi is essential to broadband. Next slide, please. And the 6 gigahertz band is essential for Wi-Fi. So in general, it's not only Wi-Fi. Unlicensed access to the 6 gigahertz band is very useful in general for wireless access systems and radio local area networks. There are different technologies that will benefit from this access to the 6 gigahertz band. So mainly Wi-Fi. We talk about the 6th generation of Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi 6E, and also about Wi-Fi 7, that it's the next generation that is being under development right now, and that we will see more details in a moment. DSA has prepared a white paper that answers many of the questions about why we need license-exempt access to the 6 gigahertz band and why we need the entire band and why we need it now. So that white paper, the link is here. You can find it at the DSA website, and it provides a very good summary. It's not only prepared by DSA members, but also by different companies in the high-tech sector. Next slide, please. And one of the questions that we receive often from authorities is about the traffic. So we know many of us used to give Wi-Fi as granted. For users, they just assume that Wi-Fi is there. They assume that the technology will keep providing the throughputs and the low latency that they need for the new applications. And we have done in a study with Asia ASIA is a company that provides service for global ISPs. They have clients all around the world. And we made a study about the traffic that is being carried out by Wi-Fi networks in Canada and the US and in Europe. The reason of why ASIA was a great partner for this study is because they provide services to ISPs who, on their side, they invest because they want to keep their customers, and the quality of experience of their customers when they use internet is very important for them. Consumers fault the ISP for poor Wi-Fi. And so that is the way we work with ASIA. They took information from different users, and they provided some histograms that reflect the traffic. The report is a very long report, so you can also find that at the DSA website, and I invite you to review it in detail. But maybe if we go to the next slide, we can focus on one of the important conclusions from that report. And this is about traffic that has been measured. These are not forecasts. These are measurements from real networks, and just those provided by ISPs, because there are many networks that are managed by different entities. And what we can see here is the traffic in North America and Europe. First, I would like to highlight the y-axis, where you can see that this is the traffic per access point per day, and we are talking about gigabytes. So in the US, the scale is it's going perfectly between, let's say, 6 and 10 gigabytes per day. And in Europe, it's a little bit lower, but also has the same trend of growing. So it means that the traffic that is managed by Wi-Fi networks is very high, and that is increasing, as you can see it in the figure. According to the trends, and taking out of this analysis the peak that we had at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have found that basically the Wi-Fi traffic doubles every 3 years. And that is the reflect of user needs and user requirements. So it's important to dedicate enough spectrum. We have other graphs that show some parameters like congestion, and at the end, there is a second report that has also been published at the DSA website that shows that it's important to have enough spectrum in the entire band, because otherwise users will start to get that congestion. And that is the way we measure. It's like when ISPs, when users start to complain to the ISPs, that is the critical point, because it means that they are not getting the experience that they need in their networks. So that is also important, like it's showing how it's growing. The decision in the US to open the entire 6 gigahertz band give US and Canada a time frame of 5 years. So it means that they are going to cover the requirements from users for the next 5 years. In Europe, just 480 megahertz of spectrum will, if we keep the same growing rate, we will have they have enough spectrum for the next 3 years. Next slide, please. And then we have the technology updates. So Wi-Fi 6E, it's the new technology that allows us to have gigabit speeds, wider channels, extremely low latency, high capacity, more connected devices, and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. We have seen, and I also invite you to see at the DSA website, we have many studies that show the importance for the economics of the countries and the economic value of unlicensed use in the 6 gigahertz band. Just to give an example, in the case of Brazil, the total contribution was assessed to be $160 billion in the next 10 years, including contributions to the GDP, to producer surplus, to the Brazilian population, and to producer surplus to Brazilian enterprises. Next slide, please. On the technology, so I was referring to Wi-Fi 7. I would just like to mention quickly that Wi-Fi 7 is expected to provide tens of gigabits per second. So it's really the next generation, and it's expected to be out by 2024. And one of the particularities of Wi-Fi 7 is that it handles channels up to 320 megahertz. So that's also one of the arguments of why the entire band is needed, because if you have 1200 megahertz, then you can have up to 3 non-overlapping channels. If you have just 500 megahertz, it would give just one channel of 320 megahertz. And in congested environments, that's clearly not enough. Next slide, please. That has been also the conclusion of a recent white paper that was published by Intel and that they have accepted by courtesy to let us present here. It's about the spectrum needs of Wi-Fi 7. So you can see the link of the white paper. Next slide, please. Because of the time, I will go very quickly to the conclusions. Basically, this study is showing that for the KPIs that we need for new applications like AR, augmented and virtual reality, industrial IoT, high-end gaming, users are needed to receive latency lower than 10 milliseconds and with for 99.9% of the time. And that is simply not possible to be delivered if you just have one 320 megahertz channel. So they did some tests and some simulations that prove that the only way to provide that capacity is to have 3 non-overlapping only 320 megahertz channels to cope that demand increase from the users for these new applications. Next slide, please. And we also have important aspect that is the powerful 6 gigahertz global momentum. We are seeing more and more consultations, more and more decisions from regulator to open the band. And that is extremely important because it creates economies of scale. In LATAM in particular, we have a great momentum. We have seen decisions from different regulators. We have heard from them yesterday and during the conference about the reasons and arguments of why they made those decisions. And we expect to see, of course, much more countries on that direction. The case of Europe is very interesting because Europe has decided to open through an European decision already adopted 480 megahertz of the band for license-exempt access. And recently at the last ECC plenary meeting, it was decided to have a new work item that it's going to study coexistence between license-exempt devices and incumbent services in the upper part of the band. It doesn't imply any regulatory decision, and it was a work item that was promoted by many countries of the European Union that are really interested on having the benefits of unlicensed access or license-exempt access to the entire band. So that's something very interesting. We also know that in Region 1, there are some studies for eventual IMT identification in the upper part of the band. So that will give the authorities and the regulators the opportunity to have also studies about coexistence of license-exempt access with incumbents. So that's going on. We are also having a lot of consultations in Asia-Pacific region, and we expect to see, of course, as part of the process, some decisions soon. Next slide, please. We clearly want to say that from our DSA perspective, it's important to consider heterogeneous networks. And in that context, all technologies need access to spectrum. It's important to promote the growth of mobile networks. It's important to promote also the protection of incumbents like fixed services in the band and satellite services in the band. And Wi-Fi, it's a great complement for all those new generations and new networks ecosystem. Wi-Fi can deliver excellent throughput and performance for indoor networks and also provides great capabilities for very low power devices and standard power operations. Next slide, please. So we think in general that global trajectory is still ambiguous for the yes, sorry, for unlicensed access, it's a clear path. There is a clear momentum. There is the demand case is underneath. You cannot deny that request and that demand requirements from the users. It's possible to make a very efficient use of the spectrum without disturbing incumbents. And also, unlicensed exempt access is not only for Wi-Fi. There are many other technologies that can also benefit from that decision, like near radio unlicensed, that is part of the 5G ecosystem. So we expect that this will give you some updates. Next slide, please. We will see more from Dave Wright about the ecosystem and the equipment. But right now we are having a lot of advancements in terms of productions. We are having many providers of equipment that are already that have already released commercial equipment, and that is available on the market. And we are expecting to see the final numbers at the end of the year, but the projection was that there would be more than 338 million of Wi-Fi 6E devices entering the market just this year. So that's really exciting. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, who is Jennifer McCarthy, the Vice President of Legal Advocacy at Federated Wireless. And she's going to give us an update of a very important piece of the ecosystem, that is the automated frequency coordination systems that are now on the advancing in the US. So Jennifer, please go ahead. We're going to hear her presentation. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jennifer McCarthy, Vice President of Legal Advocacy for Federated Wireless. I'm here to talk to you today about our latest product and technology, which is the Automated Frequency Coordination System for the 6 gigahertz band. Let me provide you a little background on the company, and then we can dive into some more details on the latest with AFC developments and deployments. Founded in 2012, Federated Wireless was formed by a number of scientists and technology experts from the United States. We have offices in outside of Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia, as well as in the Boston, Massachusetts area. We are a leader in automated shared spectrum solutions and have developed a cloud-based software capability that allows access to different frequency bands by both incumbent systems, government systems, commercial systems, fixed, satellite, terrestrial, with new entrants who are looking to maximize the efficiency and gain entry into new frequency bands. We currently have over 200 customers operating in the CBRS band, the 3.5 gigahertz band in the United States. And this includes the large mobile network operators, cable companies, fixed wireless service providers, enterprise users, as well as original equipment manufacturers. And then we have over 40 partners, the who's who of radio equipment vendors in the IT and telecom sectors. So we're very proud of the work we've been doing on shared spectrum solutions and are excited to bring this capability to the 6 gigahertz band. Generally speaking, what we're doing is using cloud automation and scale to revolutionize spectrum management. Basically, we are interfacing with incumbent licensee databases, adding to that information about terrain and clutter from an additional set of databases, using the cloud to compute channel availability for new devices based on propagation modeling, as well as the implementation of protection methodologies, authorizing those devices after making sure that they have met the requirements of the National Regulatory Agency for operation in that country and in that band, and then interacting with those devices over a secure interface, a protocol, to give them spectrum availability information and or to authorize them spectrum grants. As it applies to the 6 gigahertz band, the AFC, or Automated Frequency Coordination System that we've developed, is leveraging database capabilities to protect incumbents. This is a single user protection methodology rather than aggregate interference. Aggregate is what we employ for the CBRS band, but for 6 gigahertz AFC operations, single entry, single user is the approach that the FCC has adopted and is what we're implementing in our commercial AFC system capability. We look to ensure that the AFC calculates protection zones around each incumbent receiver based on information that we get out of the FCC's universal licensing system. This can also be applied to other countries and their database of incumbent operators as well. And then we take that along with information about the new device that wants to operate after they've given us information about their location and that device's height above ground level and the various power levels at which it can operate. We will account for position uncertainty in the calculation of available channels for that device. And we provide a list of frequencies or channel assignments as well as power levels that are available for that device at that particular location and at that height above ground level to ensure that all of the incumbents in that area are adequately protected. What are the advantages of the 6 gigahertz AFC? First of all, it allows us to really maximize the efficiency of frequency bands and of a scarce resource such as spectrum. We offer reliable protection of incumbents. We provide greater deployment flexibility for new entrants. As I said, spectrum usage maximization is really important. Were we not to use an EFC and just rely on, for instance, requiring very low power levels to be used or limiting the device to particular use cases such as indoors or in more narrow frequency ranges, we would really not be able to maximize the use of the 6 gigahertz band, which the AFC enables for the entire industry. It provides a growth path for multiple services. So the incumbents don't have to stop deploying or operating in the band. They are able to expand and evolve their systems on an ongoing basis. And we will accommodate those changes over time while continuing to offer new entrants maximum opportunity for accessing new spectrum. It also provides easier enforcement for regulatory bodies. Being able to communicate with devices that might be causing unexpected interference, unintended interference. We're able to correct for problems, give new channel availability instructions, or figure out whether or not the protection criteria that have been established are overly conservative or maybe overly underprotective of the incumbent services. And we can implement changes on a nationwide basis, within a matter of hours to all devices in the area and correct for any unexpected interference that might occur or look for opportunities to offer even more spectrum for new entrants to take advantage of. Some new updates that we think might be useful for you to hear about is that the certification of AFC systems and the authorization of new system operators is already underway in the United States by the FCC. At the end of November, proposals are due at the AFC by prospective system operators who are interested in offering these services on a commercial basis. The FCC will be reviewing these proposals and offering the public the opportunity to comment on them. Following that proposal review, the FCC will conditionally grant certain AFC proposals the opportunity to go to the next phase. And that will include testing in a laboratory environment to make sure that the AFC is operating properly and is compliant with the FCC's rules. And assuming that the laboratory testing goes well, we will be moving on to the field trial portion of the certification, where we will be demonstrating in front of the public how new devices, new Part 15 devices, unlicensed devices are able to connect to an AFC to receive channel availability. in a variety of locations and use cases, and ensuring that the incumbents within a given area are not receiving any unexpected interference from those new operations. So that laboratory testing and the field trials are anticipated to take place sometime in the first half of 2022. And assuming all goes well, which we hope it will, we are hopeful that we will be authorized to move forward as an AFC system operator sometime in the second half of 2022. And we are very excited. We've been working on this product for over 3 years now and have demonstrated our AFC capability in public and have received input from prospective users, equipment vendors, as well as incumbents to continually improve our prototype, which we are going to be submitting to the FCC for their review and hopefully approval and certification again in 22. Look forward to taking any questions. If you should have them, please don't hesitate to reach out. And excited to work with other countries as they are considering how they can open the 6 gigahertz band for new unlicensed device operation and maximize the use of that band for critical services such as Wi-Fi and 5G NRU. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Wright, and I am the head of Global Wireless Policy for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, and I'm very happy to be here today with you for the 6 gigahertz unlicensed showcase. So if we can move to the next slide, please. I was going to mention Martha and I are going to try to address any questions you may have, so please go ahead and register your questions in the chat window, and we'll either get to them during the slides or in a Q&A session at the end. So the first thing that I wanted to focus on is the gigabit wireless era. As we move towards 2030, certainly even today here in 2021, there's a growing need for the wireless speeds and capacities to keep up with the wireless and the cellular wireless speeds that we're beginning to talk about, and as importantly, the fixed residential broadband speeds. So as we move into a world where there is more fiber going to people's homes, as we're rolling out 10 gigabit DOCSIS and even right now the 2 gigabit DOCSIS cable systems to subscribers around the world, what we're finding is that unfortunately, oftentimes the Wi-Fi in a subscriber's home becomes the bottleneck to the performance. And what we're showing with this graphic is simply contrasting the available data rates that you can achieve in a 40 megahertz channel, which is really about the maximum channel width that we have available for Wi-Fi if we're limited to the 2.4, the sort of legacy 2.4 and 5 gigahertz bands. Versus going to an 80 megahertz or 160 megahertz wide channel, which becomes very realistic with 6 gigahertz, particularly if the full 1200 megahertz from 5925 to 7125 is open. And what you'll see is, a typical two-stream client, 40 megahertz channel on the left, you can get about half a gigabit, so about 500 megabits. On the right, moving to a 80 or 160 megahertz channel, that same two-stream client is now operating at above a gigabit, 1.2 or 2.4 even with a 160 megahertz channel. And this is a 2x2 kind of a client. So I know there was a question, I believe it was from was it Juan Sal Perez, if I remember, or Juan Carlos Perez was asking, what are the typical uplink and downlink throughputs? It does depend. I mean, it depends on how many streams the device supports, both the access point and the client, and then the channel width. But I think these are good illustrative rates, data rates. So two-stream client, 80 megahertz channel, you're at 1.2. So if it goes to a 4-stream, you're about 2.4. If you go to 160 megahertz channel with a 4-stream, you'd be at 4.8, almost 5 gigabits per second. And latency-wise, I mean, we're looking at the same kinds of latencies that we have with 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi today. So certainly it depends on architecture and where the data path, is actually flowing, whether it's being locally broken out or brought back to a central point for distribution. But Wi-Fi latencies tend to be in the low single digits, milliseconds types of latencies. I think the important thing here is as we think forward. I mean, we just had Meta talking about the future, the metaverse, mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, and so you start thinking about, experiencing a 360-degree 4K or 8K video, or just augmented reality, being able to look around and see all sorts of information coming up on your, on your glasses or contact lenses. We're going to need much greater throughput than we have today. Immersive gaming, 360-degree gaming, etc. So, we do need this gigabit type performance, certainly. We will need it. We haven't had a major allocation of spectrum since 2003 for Wi-Fi, and we're going to expect that we need to make this 6 gigahertz band meet the needs for the next decade or so. So, as you think forward to what we could be doing 8 or 10 years from now, it's the allocation of 6 gigahertz, and particularly the 1200 megahertz, in 6 gigahertz, that would make that possible. Next slide, please. In response to the opportunity, there has been a great response from industry in the terms of the equipment availability for the 6 gigahertz band. So as soon as the FCC in the U.S. acted, and then South Korea, Brazil, and other countries around the world have acted to open the 6 gigahertz band. Frankly, even prior to that, we had major industry players at the chipset, component, module, and device level, all working on putting 6 gigahertz support into their Wi-Fi products. So chipsets from Broadcom and Qualcomm, modules from Intel, devices from Samsung, Google with a Pixel. We now have laptop and notebook form factors with 6 gigahertz, actually like 20 different form factors there, a whole range of consumer grade residential access points supporting 6 gigahertz, IoT devices, and then on the far right, my company, HPE Aruba, we introduced the world's first enterprise class 6 gigahertz product with the 635 access point. We announced that in May and started shipping it in Q3 of this year. So there's a whole range of different devices that are now available for the 6 gigahertz band. We note here that the Wi-Fi Alliance had estimated 338 million products shipping this year with Wi-Fi 6, 6E, which is 6 in the 6 gigahertz band, and then around 700 million next year is the Wi-Fi Alliance estimate. So a very healthy and growing ecosystem. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do with this slide is sort of just contrast where we are, because there have been some calling for allocating particularly the upper 6 gigahertz band for licensed IMT technologies. And so, a band is only as important or as useful as the ecosystem that forms around the opportunity. I think all regulators want to see their allocations put to good intensive use by industry. And what we're highlighting here is, the activity that's gone on. Again, this has been going on really for 3 or 4 years now in the case of license exempt operation or unlicensed use, which is the left-hand column. And we show everything from the standards that have been done, both IEEE for Wi-Fi as well as 3GPP for the 5G NR and unlicensed spectrum. The regulatory equipment authorizations, so from the US, from Europe, and then the industry certifications. So everything from the Wi-Fi Alliance's 6E program to the 3GPP NRU work that would happen in working group, in RAND 4 of 3GPP. And then finally, equipment forecast, and I mentioned the Wi-Fi Alliance forecasts already. So yeah, a very promising, I mean, a large and growing ecosystem and everything that's needed to support that on the left. And then frankly, we're just showing that on the right, there really hasn't been much of any activity in terms of actual equipment or even standards or equipment authorization processes to approve IMT equipment, traditional licensed NR equipment in the 6 gigahertz band. So I think as a regulator, it's safe to say, if I were to make the band available for license exempt, industry is positioned to respond pretty much immediately. In the case of IMT, it's very speculative that anything will happen there. Global harmonization is incredibly important, and we now have, about 50 countries that have opened 6 gigahertz for unlicensed. So, the ecosystem on the left will continue to grow and thrive. Lots of questions about what will happen on the right. And then finally, on the far right, we just point out that, the IMT equipment industry, chipset industry, has really been focused on the opportunity in the 3 gigahertz band. So N77, N78 support, maybe N79 for Asia as well. But that really has been the focus, and that's where the ecosystem is really been developing. And we think that's great. And 3 gigahertz should be the focus for mid-band IMT. Next slide, please. I'm just going to quickly touch on this. I mean, again, if your imperative is to support 5G operations, the best way to do that in terms of the 6 gigahertz band is to make it available as license exempt. In the case that is available for license exempt, we can continue to do all the offloading that Wi-Fi does today for the mobile cellular network. So about 70% of mobile data traffic tends to go over a Wi-Fi device. We have some stats there on the percentage of traffic that will be offloaded to Wi-Fi. We can support in a point-to-point mode or point-to-multipoint mode a lot of the 5G backhaul that is necessary. In fact, that's one of the primary use cases. And then I mentioned already the work that 3GPP has done to make the 5G NRU or NR in unlicensed spectrum available for the 6 gigahertz band. So in the same way that operators are doing license assisted access in 5 gigahertz unlicensed, where they can use that for supplementary capacity, they can do the same exact thing with 6 gigahertz unlicensed using that in the NRU mode. Next slide, please. So we just had a few slides here about what some of the regulators are saying in regard to this opportunity. I'm sorry, just trying to find my version of this slide because I cannot read my little laptop screen. And it's really a lot of what I talked about. You're going to see support for the wider channel bandwidths, a recognition that, just like the IMT cellular industry is moving towards 80 or 100 megahertz of mid-band spectrum per operator in order to achieve those gigabit speeds with NR. We need the same capabilities with Wi-Fi. It kind of goes back to that gigabit imperative slide that I started with. So regulators recognize that, making 80 megahertz and 160 megahertz and potentially even 320 megahertz wide channels is important. If we're going to see the successes we've had with Wi-Fi over the last 2 decades continue into the next decade, we need these sorts of allocations to enable those sorts of bandwidths. You know, the importance of Wi-Fi during the COVID lockdowns has become increasingly clear as people were, relying on Wi-Fi as they worked from home, as they learned from home. We were setting up Wi-Fi even in like health treatment centers and triage centers outside of hospitals and things like that. So Wi-Fi has more than shown its societal value over the last 2 years of the pandemic. And so, we see that acknowledged here in some of these statements. And then the last slide, please. I just wanted to leave you with this slide on, why it's important to act now and really to act on the full 1200 megahertz now. Again, we've seen people saying, well, now there's an ITU Region 1 study item for WRC 23 looking at, the 6425 to 7025 range. Obviously, that doesn't impact Latin America as well, anyways, because you all aren't in Region 1. But even if that were the case, I would draw your attention to the second quote here from ACMA in Australia, where they said, a study item for 23 is not sufficient reason to delay a decision on the upper 6 gigahertz. We have to act in the interest of our country. We need to act now. We're not going to wait, just to see what may or may not happen. And anyways, it's always up to the national regulator in terms of how they would implement any ITU recommendations. So, you've got supportive statements here from Anatel, from the FCC, from ISET Canada, and then we also have one from Saudi, just pointing out why they felt there was compelling reasons to, either make a decision or, in the case of Australia, at least consult on the upper 6 gigahertz band now. And again, we're looking at the needs of Wi-Fi for the next 10 years. We need to open up the spectrum so that industry can continue to respond with the equipment, and we can enable these new services that are going to take us into the future. So thank you very much. I look forward to any questions you may have. Back to you, Martha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dave. And indeed, I would like to take the time to answer a couple of questions that we have from the participants. So there is one, Dave, that maybe you can would like to address. Can we use unlicensed access for last mile links, point to point, and which is the estimated distance?
Yeah, great point. A great question, I should say. And yes, I think that there is a growing sense that the 6 gigahertz band could be used in a manner similar to the 5 gigahertz band for, highly directional, higher gain point to point or point to multi-point links for things like the last mile applications. You heard from Jennifer McCarthy directly before my slides, and she was talking about the standard power mode of operation and how in the US that's being enabled by an automated frequency coordination system. So there's nothing that says, that an AFC could not authorize a, higher power, higher gain system, with a highly directional antenna. They would need to make sure they were coordinating that and only authorizing or approving the frequencies that would not interfere with any of the incumbent operations. But that is certainly feasible, and we think that's a very good use case for 6 gigahertz.
Excellent, thank you. And there was also a question for Jennifer that she has authorized me to answer, and is what will be the typical applications for AFC? And did you have any approach to operators in LATAM? So it's important to mention that Jennifer provided from her company what they are working on AFCs, but as DSA, many of our members are also working on providing solutions for AFC. So it's something that is right now, as she explained, the FCC is receiving many proposals. And the typical applications are very large. We could have, for example, important applications for enterprise use cases. It could be also very useful for outdoor hotspots for Wi-Fi access, and also for campuses that need to bring connectivity, to provide connectivity to different users. Probably, Dave, you have other applications in mind, or would you like to complement that on terms of applications that we can expect?
Yes, I mean, AFC and the standard power mode of operation that it enables is really critical. So without AFC, we're somewhat limited to the low power indoor modes or the very low power. And very low power is great for those sort of the augmented reality applications. Having your phone talk to your glasses and these sorts of very short range, high bandwidth communications. So yeah, but at 14 dBm, you're not going very far. Outdoors in particular. So yeah, the only way we can really ensure that we're effectively protecting the incumbents is with some sort of a coordination approach, and AFC is the way that we're going to do that in the U.S. and Canada, South Korea. We believe other countries will follow that AFC model. So with standard power, you get outdoor operation, you get higher power operation. So instead of the 24 dBm type range that we have, 250 milliwatts type range that we have with LPI, you go up to 4 watts potentially with AFC. And so all the outdoor applications, right? So municipal Wi-Fi, warehouses, logistics, arenas, dockyards, you know, educational campuses. I mean, we put Wi-Fi systems in 5 gigahertz outdoors, you know, all over Latin America, you know, for a variety of very important use cases. And there's really no opportunity for that in 6 gigahertz unless you have a standard power mode of operation. And again, that tends to come along with an AFC coordination system.
Thank you, Dave. We are going to finalize with the conclusions. And so I think we have answered all the questions we had. So our conclusions are: it's very important for administrations to consider unlicensed access to the 6 gigahertz band. There are many reasons for that. It's crucial for digital transformation in LATAM. The 1200 megahertz will address the growing demand for wireless capacity. It's part of a long-term vision because it prepares the path for Wi-Fi 7 and future spectrum requirements. It's also a way to increase to meet the increased demand after COVID-19 situation. It provides economic benefits, even if there are no licensing fees or any auction associated to that process. There is a global momentum, and that is positive because there are many chipsets and equipment, and the ecosystem is already available. Next slide, please. It's a way to make a very efficient use of the spectrum, because additional to the incumbents that can continue to thrive in the band and coexist, we can have additional applications like Wi-Fi 6E or a new radio unlicensed. It enables new use cases and new applications like augmented and virtual reality, or as we were hearing from Dave, also standard power applications. There are more opportunities for many channels, so we can spread the energy across different frequencies. There is a neutrality important aspect that was discussed yesterday during the conference, because airlines can work with any backhaul solution. It could be fiber, it could be cable. It's useful to download mobile traffic, and it's also a very good complement for satellite in hard-to-reach areas. It allows different stakeholders to deploy gigabit-class networks, and most important, efficient use of the spectrum. The use of the spectrum is important because it's a resource that if you don't use it, it doesn't have any value. So there is an opportunity to get it being used, and the benefits are immediate. So next slide, please. That's our final message today. The time to act is now. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you again for attending this showcase. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Jennifer. Bye. And thank you, Global Forum, for the organization. Bye.